Now, at a weekend rally, President Robert Mugabe issued a warning to leaders of the armed forces not to meddle in politics. And this comes after his wife, Grace, challenged him to name a successor, a move that was rejected by, amongst others, the war veterans. All of this is being seen as part of a race to replace the ailing Mugabe. Meanwhile, former South African President Thabo Mbeki was in Harare yesterday, where he met Mugabe to discuss his legacy of liberation movements. And we're going to talk about that in a short while. But first, let me welcome our guest, Mr. Chirimbowa. Thank you very much for joining us and welcome to the program. So it seems as if things are escalating, and perhaps that's natural agitation before elections, before successors are named.
Yeah, I wouldn't say things are actually agitating because of the elections. In particular, when you look at President Mugabe's statements in response to the security services. But I think the comments, they have to be understood within the context of ZANU-PF succession politics and President Robert Mugabe's modicum of rule, which is maybe a divide and rule, where he creates faction and he plays one faction against the other. So the wife was speaking, yes, but it wasn't just the wife speaking. That was actually Robert Mugabe, because he likes speaking through proxies and he operates through proxies. So that's his modicum of rule.
But what can he gain from dividing his own party?
No, what he gains, you should remember, Robert Mugabe has always wanted to have a one-party state. If you quite remember quite well, the one-party state debate in Zimbabwe and how it faltered in 1989, and he grudgingly had to accept, but his idea was to have a one-party state with one leader. So when he failed to achieve that, he has always been on a de facto one-party state project. So, the de jure failed. The official, process of having a one-party state failed. So when it failed, he didn't show his ambitions. So that's why you always hear first secretary and, the first and the last secretary, no another secretary. Despite that, that is another bone of contention. Yeah.
So at 93, even he must be admitting to himself that, look, maybe this isn't a long-term project for me personally. If that's the case, then who and what is the project about?
No, the whole project is about his role. It's just a personal project, his ambition, fulfilling that, his life president's project, which he failed to achieve. And you should also know that it's not really, it's more of a chieftainship. If you would, want to quote Jonathan May, what he says, he actually managed to characterize it that when you look at most of these African leaders, it's more of, the chief dies in office and there's no successor. So to me, Mugabe is more of a chief rather than maybe a president.
So what is the state of ZANU-PF? And just before we do that, in fact, former South African President Thabo Mbeki was in Harare yesterday, where he met with President Mugabe to discuss the legacy of liberation movements, and that includes ZANU-PF, of course.
Former President Mbeki came on a private visit day before yesterday, Monday, to meet President Mugabe. He was accompanied by an advisor, former Minister Sidney Mufumadi, and a few other members of staff. And he had 2 sessions of meetings with President Mugabe on Monday afternoon, and another one yesterday, Tuesday, in the form of a working lunch. My information is that they exchange views on continental issues. As you know, both of them are strong Pan-Africanists, and on the region, the SADC region, and exchange some information and ideas on developments in their 2 countries, South Africa and Zimbabwe.
That's South Africa's ambassador to Zimbabwe, His Excellency Mr. Mbete. All right, so why would President Mugabe reach out to Thabo Mbeki at this time and talk about the role of liberation movements? ZANU-PF, what is the state of play?
Yeah, I think what you have to understand, this is diplomacy at play. I wouldn't say President Mugabe reached out. I think what did the South African reached out, because the South Africans realized there's a problem in Zimbabwe. There's a crisis, and mind you, this crisis also dates back, I mean, to the Mbeki presidents. When they tried to deal with this, then they couldn't. And also they have to look amongst themselves within the ANC, say who has got leverage or who can be listened to by Mugabe. And Mugabe tends to have a favorable lean towards Mbeki, and also Mbeki understanding the dynamics of ZANU-PF. So it's actually the South Africans trying to be proactive. For me, everything else is just a way of trying to court up to say, I mean, President Mugabe invited. But from what I gather and from my interactions with those whom I know close to the ANC, is they've realized, and even when you look the outbursts of the Minister of Police, I mean, are all about this, is because Zimbabwe has become a big thorn in the region because of what is happening, I mean, the outflows from Zimbabwe into the region and the social destabilization and discohesion it's causing.
How close are we to things unraveling? I mean, there are reports that yesterday the army and the police were actually fighting in the streets.
Yeah. I think what you have to understand, there's nothing much really unraveling. There's nothing new about the army and the police fighting. But what is
actual fists and actual blows.
Yeah, it's not the first time. That has happened many times. If you remember during, I mean, just before the GNU, the riots when the soldiers were rioting at the banks, there've always been animosity between the police and the soldiers. And also people have to understand the reasons, because the reason which sparked this fight was the pirate taxis, which are known as Mshika Shika, which simply means a loose place. These urban, informal economic places where soldiers and the police in Zimbabwe have actually allocated each other spaces where police also operate. So one policeman put spikes, the iron spikes, on the car of a soldier. So these soldiers were now reacting to say, what you guys, what are you doing? But to me, beyond to be something to do with those minor tensions, it doesn't speak to a broader. So
this is a pure taxi war?
This is a pure taxi war, because what we have to understand is that the forms of governance, the relations which emerged in Zimbabwe when it descended into chaos, they evolved new forms of governance which are highly informal, chaotic, and also driven by some kind of vigilanteism and warlordism.
All right. You know what? So much to talk about, but one of the things that's most urgent and most needs attention is the economy, which is not providing the jobs that are required, 90% unemployment. Let's just take another dip and comment about Zimbabwe's economy.
Economic growth, which is expected to be 3.7% this year, and we reckon that growth will be around 5% in 2018. 2017 witnessed a turnaround of the national economy at a time when inflation, underpinned by an expansionary fiscal policy stance, crept out of deflation in 2017, so in February 2017, after 2 years of prolonged deflation. To us, that's an achievement, because after deflation, you go into a recession.
All right. I don't know whether we should take that seriously. Is it realistic that the growth rates that are being mentioned there, the Zimbabwean economy?
I think it's just wishful thinking. I mean, it's daydreaming on the part of the governor, because to me, with the figure, he's just throwing figures around. But if you ask him to account where is that growth coming from when there's no investment in Zimbabwe, maybe if he's talking about the expansion of the informal economy, that vendors will grow by 5%. Yes, I can even say they can grow by 10–15%. If he's talking about the vending economy, the cross-border economy, or the informal economy, but as far as we are talking about a formal modern economy, I think those figures are over-exaggerated.
Right. So the Deputy Reserve Bank Governor talked about they're struggling to clear foreign payments, illegal foreign currency trading, parallel market. How can there be a parallel market when the bond note is supposed to be equal to $1 and the country operates with foreign currency?
The good thing you're saying the bond note is supposed to be, which way you've correctly captured, but the reality is it is not. The bond note can never be equal to $1. And what you also have to understand, the emergence of the parallel market is because of the government's insatiable appetite for spending, where it keeps on printing treasury bills and it loads them onto the market, and it actually gets to a point whereby even these treasury bills are being sold at discounted rates, and when it happens, it certainly creates different pricing structures. Actually, you have got almost 4 pricing tiers in Zimbabwe. That is for the hard currency, the US dollar, then for the RTGS, which is the real-time gross settlement system, and then you as well for the bond notes. So when you look at all these things, they've got different, and you also have the treasury bills, and when you're looking at the treasury bills, you're looking at the exchange rate of about 40% loss in compared to the dollar. But if it is the bond note, you're looking at something around 10%, 10 to 20%, and with the RTGS, it's also between 10 to 15%. So already, because there are distortions in the market, and people clearly know that these things are not at par.
All right, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. So much to discuss. Hopefully, we'll get you back in studio again to discuss this opposition parties that we really should have been able to tackle. But Tamuka Chirombo, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the program and giving us your insights about the situation in Zimbabwe.